Hello, everyone, and welcome to the lineup for this August the 29th, 2024. I'm Barry Stagner. Very glad to be with you this evening. Hope your day was blessed and that you have a great Labor Day weekend ahead in front of you. And just one little word of correction from my schedule that I mentioned last week. On Sunday, September 29th, I will be at Calvary Chapel Faith Fellowship that's in Liberty Township, Ohio. That's not in Brookville, where the conference is on the 28th. So, again, just one correction Liberty Township, Ohio, on September 29th. I'll be speaking at the morning services there and hope I can meet some of you there if I didn't get to meet you at the conference in Brookville the day before. So, anyway, that's it for the updates. And I want to encourage you to stick around till the end of the program because there's something that we need to address via one of the stories. And I think it is germane to the day and age in which we live and what the church is experiencing and is going to experience in the coming days. So stick around until the end if you would. Now, our first story comes from the Jewish News Syndicate. I think most of us are aware of this, that Israeli forces rescued a hostage alive from southern Gaza. Israeli forces have rescued a hostage alive from Hamas captivity in the Gaza Strip, the Jewish News Syndicate reports. The Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli Security Agency said in a joint statement on Tuesday. And Qaid Farham al-Qadi, 52, from the Bedouin city of Rahat in the Negev desert, was rescued from a tunnel in southern Gaza in a complex operation by the Israeli Defense Forces, the 401st Brigade Yahalom, together with the ISA forces under the command of the 162nd Division. He was alone at the time of his rescue. And the father of 11 is in stable condition and was undergoing medical testing at Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, according to the military. And his family has been updated, and the IDF is accompanying them. Soroka said that he is fully conscious and in good general condition, has already met with a family member with great excitement. He was held in captivity for 326 days since being abducted by Hamas in Kim on October 7th. Mivtakim, and his rescue leaves the number of hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza at 108, including 104 of the 251 taken on October 7th, 34 of whom are known to be deceased. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke on the phone with al-Qadi, according to the Prime Minister's office, and said, "Welcome home, Farhan Qadi. I congratulate the IDF and Shin Bet on another successful rescue operation. We are working tirelessly to return all our abductees," Netanyahu said in video remarks. Now, this is important for one main reason. We hear just ridiculous comments and accusations from the international community and many, especially young people, talking about Israel being an apartheid state. Well, al-Qadi is an Arab, and Israeli soldiers risked their lives to rescue this Arab man. And if you've ever been to Israel, you know it's anything but an apartheid state. There are people move openly and freely, and all the different religious belief systems interact on a daily basis. As a matter of fact, when we go on tours, we will eat dinner or lunch at Palestinian restaurants over there. So, hopefully this will straighten out some of the thinking out there, if there be any who view uh, Israel errantly, like many do today, as some type of oppressive regime that doesn't allow people to live and do what it is that families do together, no matter what their ethnicity may be. This man, again, Farhan Qadi, is an Arab man, lived in a Bedouin area of the Negev, and Israeli soldiers, again, went in and risked life and limb to rescue this man. And I think one of the things we need to draw attention to is that Netanyahu said we are working tirelessly to return all our abductees. He didn't say all the Jewish ones. He said all of them, including this Arab man. So keep that in mind as we hear these ridiculous accusations and just the heinous support of Hamas that we see on college campuses, and just this outlandish thinking that is so just grossly ignorant of facts and truth that is dominating our culture today. Reuters reports that a top U.S. general says Israeli Hezbollah exchange recently reduced the risk of a wider war. However, he cautioned that Iran could still cause a regional escalation. We do know that the U.S. administration has contacted Israel, saying as of yesterday that within the next 24 to 48, there will be some type of response from the Iranians, and nothing yet today, as far as I know. Now, Israel's preemptive attack on Hezbollah early on Sunday has somewhat reduced the near term risk of a wider regional war, according to General Charles Q. Brown, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, as he told Reuters in an interview on Monday. And Brown flew to Israel hours after the exchange of fire between Israel and Iran's Lebanese terror proxy, which launched hundreds of drones and rockets at the Jewish state after Israeli warplanes knocked out thousands of Hezbollah launchers in southern Lebanon. The top U.S. commander spoke to Reuters at the end of the snap 3-day Middle East swing, cautioning that while the immediate risk of war has dissipated to a degree, the threat from Iran remains. Tehran and its terror proxy in Lebanon both vowed revenge for the targeted killings of high-ranking Hezbollah and Hamas leaders last month in Beirut and Tehran, respectively. Following Sunday's attack, Hezbollah declared success, though the terror group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, said that the terror group would continue to evaluate the outcome of the strikes in coming days. You had two things you knew were going to happen. One's already happened, said Brown, while flying out of Israel. Now it depends on how the second is going to play out. How Iran responds will dictate how Israel responds, which will dictate whether there's going to be a broader conflict or not, he continued, while suggesting the Islamic Republic's leadership might reconsider a more robust response. Well, the Jerusalem Post says that Khamenei has actually hinted at a willingness to cooperate with the West while maintaining his personal stance on terrorism. Ayatollah Khamenei hinted at a potential shift to a softer foreign policy while emphasizing no trust in the West and a firm stance on terrorism. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei hinted toward a possible shift to a softer policy. Looks like we got a repeat there in the article. And according to a report, during a meeting with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, and the Iranian cabinet. I do this without my glasses, so sometimes it's a big blur there in front of me. And the Iranian cabinet, Khamenei said, "We should not pin our hopes on the enemy, nor should we wait for the approval of our plans. This does not prevent communication with them when necessary, as it does no harm. However, we should not rely on them or place trust in them." That is Western nations, of course. Khamenei also said in the same meeting, "There is no plan without challenges. For some, the instinctive reaction to obstacles is retreat, but this approach is flawed. Instead, we must overcome the obstacle or find a way to circumvent it. And while there may be instances where tactical retreat is necessary after all avenues have been explored, it is crucial not to abandon our position or compromise at the first sign of difficulty," he further emphasized. And so, again, pointing back to that report last evening that, the Iranians were going to strike, this position of softening a bit on engaging with and interacting with um, Western nations, I think is a pretty significant tell. That even in the articles talking about this announcement and then the U.S. administration's warning, it was hinted at that this would be a limited response so as not to start, wider conflict. And I think what everyone is hoping for is that, at least in the Khamenei regime, is that they do something to save face and say, you can't just come into our territory, and kill somebody who's a visitor, especially someone who is a dignitary, at least in their minds, and get away with it. And I think that's really the whole thing they're after is a tit for tat type of response. Because one thing that most of the nations in the Middle East know, even in their misguided religious beliefs, is that Israel is a formidable force. And they may not recognize that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is on Israel's side, but what they do know is that Israel is not somebody to mess with, and they will retaliate, as we've seen of late, and rightfully so. Now, moving out into the broader picture, seeing what's happening around the world, I think most of you keep up to date with Amir on Telegram, and the great job he does at keeping us all informed of what's happening from a boots on the ground perspective, and broadening out into elements that have to do with Bible prophecy, including things like Zechariah 12:3, where we know that the whole world is going to be against the Jews, Jerusalem being named there, specifically representing the capital city of Israel and all the Jews. And the Jewish News Syndicate reports that the state comptroller says 44% of New York hate crimes in 2023 were aimed at Jews. The Office of State Comptroller Thomas P. DiNapoli released a new analysis on Wednesday titled The Concerning Growth of Hate Crime in New York State, which broke down hate crime reports by intended target and compared the results with previous years. In 2023, nearly 44% of all recorded hate crime incidents and 88% of religious-based hate crimes targeted Jews, the largest share of all such crimes, the report said. DiNapoli stated that fighting hatred and bigotry demands that we communicate with, respect, and accept our neighbors. It requires our spiritual, political community, and business leaders to take active roles in denouncing hate, investing in prevention and protection efforts, and increasing education that celebrates the value of New York's diversity. In 2023, hate crimes were divided along the lines of nearly half based on religion and about a third on race or ethnicity, with the LGBTQ community being targeted by 17%. And between 2018 and 2023, hate crimes against Jews rose from 253 to 477, an increase of 89%. During the same period, hate crimes against Muslims in the state rose from 18 to 37, a rise of 106%. Now, this is interesting because we see so many in the media, who won't say anything negative about Islam, especially radical and extremist Islam. And, the belief systems, we've got this 1,450 plus year war going on between the Sunnis and the Shias. They're killing each other for the right to rule and establish that global caliphate that they hope will come around. The Shias obviously want themselves to be in charge, which represents the Iranians, the Sunnis, Saudi Arabia. Believe that it is essential that they be in charge, and those who are more adept and highly educated in the rules of Islam and the history of Islam, that they be in charge. And all the violence we've seen, and yet nobody says anything about it. And especially when we've got news stories going on and acts of violence, especially with all these migrant stories that we're seeing now, all the rapes and the murders that are happening in countries all over Europe. And yet nobody will say anything about the ideology or the religious affiliation because that's not culturally sensitive. And we have to watch the step, so to speak, in these days. And, this statistic kind of bears that out, that nobody wants to say anything about some of the things that are going on. And, it's not that all Muslims are radical or extremists or murderers. But the fact of the matter is, most terrorists are Muslims. I mean, that's a fact. And statistically speaking, there's just no debate regarding that issue. I mean, even what happened with here at the World Trade Center in 2001 on September 11th, there weren't any Hindus that hijacked planes, or Buddhists, or Christians, or Jews. They were all Muslims. And yet, the world, I think, because of its political correctness and all the things that, and this speaks, I think, too, also to the spiritual component of what's going on, is that the hatred has to be focused on the Jews because that's what the Bible said is going to happen in the last days. And we're watching that happen just in incredible increases, as the article states and the report found. Now, here's a story from Harbinger's Daily, and it was authored by Ken Ham, the head of the uh, Answers in Genesis ministry there in Kentucky and Ohio. Two different locations there. I think the Ark Project is in Kentucky and the Creation Museum in Ohio, if I remember right. Been to them both, but have been a lot of places, and sometimes things get jumbled up in my memory. Harbinger's Daily says the biblical illiteracy is at astonishingly high levels in the church. Is the Exodus from Egypt a New Testament or Old Testament event? What about the crossing of the Jordan, the healing of a man born blind, a miraculous escape from prison, or the healing of Naaman's leprosy? It's hard to believe, but according to a new study, 1 in 10 American Protestant churchgoers can't answer these sorts of questions. The survey asked the question, or 11% is the actual percentage. Of all the stories found in the Old Testament of the Bible, which one is your favorite? As a side note, I don't believe we should use stories when talking about Bible, as story means fairy tale or not true in our culture today. So I'll use biblical accounts throughout this article. Of those surveyed, 11% said with an account from the Old Testament, New Testament, not the Old. Another 10% either couldn't identify a single account from the Old Testament or had no favorite passage. Biblical illiteracy is rampant, and that explains a lot of the positions that are being taken in the church today because people don't study the whole counsel of God. And interestingly, and not surprisingly, given our research, the second most popular account is Noah and the Ark, marginally surpassed by the Exodus and Moses. And when combined, 32% of favorite accounts were from Genesis. The study also looked into churchgoers' confidence in their ability to, quote, summarize or accurately recall various accounts, and the results were dismal. For most of the accounts they asked respondents about, around 25% of respondents said they could only provide a quick overview of each account. Some, like Noah's Ark, had higher degrees of confidence than others. Now, that might not seem too bad. After all, 24% of churchgoers claim they can recite all of Daniel and the lion's den from memory, and 39% think they could actually summarize it. And the numbers for popular accounts were in that ballpark, but the study also had a control, and that's where it gets worrisome. The study asked respondents about the story of Romulus and Remus. And I now note that I said this story this time, and that's because this is a mythological account from the ancient Romans to explain how Rome and the Roman civilization was founded by twin brothers, fathered by the god Mars and cared for briefly by a wolf and a woodpecker. One brother later kills the other, among other atrocities. It's certainly not real history, and it's nowhere found or mentioned in the Bible. So, what did the survey respondents say when they were asked about the story of Romulus and Remus? Only 39% recognize this story is not in the Bible. Only 4 out of 10 churchgoers. The others believed it was in the Bible, but couldn't tell any of the story, 33%. An astonishing 16% said they could give it a quick overview, 6% said they could recall most of it, and 1% said they could even recite it from memory. Shocking that 6 in 10 churchgoers were unable to recognize a Roman myth isn't in the Bible. You know, we have sayings that float around that aren't in the Bible and misrepresentations of Scripture. And let me cite 2 for you here before we move on. I'm sure we've all heard somebody say God helps those who help themselves, and that's not in the Bible. But what the Bible does indicate is that God helps those who can't help themselves, and that would be all of us. And we also hear misquoted from Paul's writings to Timothy that money is the root of all evil. The Bible doesn't say that either. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and many have pierced themselves through with many sorrows because of it. So it's easy to get things twisted around, and it's easy, especially in the culture that we have today, where a lot of churches aren't teaching the Bible. They're teaching self-help messages and things of that order. So that explains a lot of what we see being manifested at this time, where I think we are so very, very close to that moment and twinkling of an eye. And it's just not a good time to be told fables and fairy tales. But that's what Paul said was an indication of the last days, a time that would come where people would not put up with sound doctrine. They don't want to hear about, the things that the Bible has to say about our morality and sexual behaviors and identities and things of that nature. They want to hear things that make them feel better. Things like, if you give money, God's obligated then to give you 100-fold more, and these other misrepresentations of Scripture that are being taught out there. And I just earlier today, actually, I saw a little clip of a pastor. I thought it was really interesting as he's sharing with his congregation, and he said, "It's come to my understanding that some people have left the church because of things that I have said about moral behaviors going on in this church and how people are living. And they didn't like that I pointed it out, and that many people have, some people rather, have left the church because of my position." And the pastor said, "So I've come to a decision." And then he allowed for a significant pregnant pause to build up some anticipation. And he said, "My decision," this is obviously a Southern church, he said, "I ain't going to hell for any of y'all. I'm going to speak the truth." And he began to shout that phrase over and over and over. And as it went on, about the sixth or seventh time, he shouted, "I'm going to speak the truth." You could see people begin to stand with their hands in the air. And it's only truth that will guide us through this life and live in a manner that's pleasing and acceptable to God. Are we going to blow it? We sure do. All of us do. But the fact is that we're saved by the blood of the Lamb while we were yet sinners. So, no, we don't take a casual attitude towards sin. Listen, the Ten Commandments are still in play. And that's not putting people under the law. We have to remember that in order to right, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, sin has to be defined. And it can't be defined by popular vote. It can't be defined by anybody human. It can only be defined by one who is sinless. And therefore, the Ten Commandments are the measure by which we are to live and avoid sinning ourselves. And I applaud this pastor for not bowing to the emotional whims of the congregation and saying, "I'm not going to hell for any of y'all. I will speak the truth." Now, there's a website called The Economic Collapse, and it poses a question. It really struck a nerve, and I wanted to include this article because this is something I see just about every day. And the Economic Collapse reports, if everything is so great, why are millions of Americans sleeping in their vehicles? Have you noticed an unusual number of vehicles in the parking lots of major retailers in your area at night? Yes. If you look closely enough, you will see that many of those vehicles actually have people sleeping in them. At this point, millions of Americans are sleeping in their vehicles every night. This is happening even though we are told that the economy is just fine. But of course, the truth is that the system is failing all around us. So if you get to sleep in a very warm bed in a very warm house, you should consider yourself to be very blessed, because vast numbers of people are really struggling right now. And the primary reason why so many people are living in their vehicles is because of the cost of living that has soared to unprecedented heights. In particular, the cost of housing has become extremely oppressive. In fact, housing in the United States has become more unaffordable than it has ever been before. This week, the article says, I was stunned to read about a 33-year-old man named Ishan that is paying $2,100 a month to share a house with 23 other people. In a city as notoriously expensive as New York, it's common to see people in their late 20s and early 30s living with roommates to help manage the high cost of living. But Ishan has taken it to the next level with his current living situation in Brooklyn, a communal building that he shares with a whopping 23 other people. And when I say I have 23 housemates, people are like, "What? That's wild." And Ishan says and told CNBC, but it's actually quite nice. How much? Who would you pay that much to live with 23 strangers? And of course, most Americans can't afford that $2,100 a month for housing. For example, it's being reported that some flight attendants that work for American Airlines are now sleeping in their cars because the pay is so low. Most new flight attendant hirees are required to live in cities like Dallas, Miami, and New York, which have high costs of living that they cannot afford, Hedrick noted. And American flight attendees are sleeping in their cars, she said. Some of them fight for trips just for the chance to eat the plane meals if the pilots don't take their meals first. Our new hire flight attendants are struggling, Hedrick said, adding that new hires most strongly rejected the 17% hike. When I was growing up, I always thought that those that were selected as flight attendants had very good jobs, but those days are long gone. Van life or van living is a term becoming more and more popular around the country. People packing up their lives, moving into a mobile unit, and exploring the states. And according to Yahoo Finance, the number of American van lifers has increased by 63% over the last couple of years, going from 1.9 million in 2020 to 3.1 million in 2022. In the old days, if you lived in a van down by the river, you were considered to be a bum. But in this economy, living in a van down by the river is just considered to be normal. Now, needless to say, there are some van lifers that choose the lifestyle because of the freedom it offers, but there are many others that have been forced into that lifestyle. And the reason this caught my eye is because in the place not too far from our home, where I walk, one of the two places I walk, the big boy Louie, every single day. There are cars lined this one street. There's a huge federal building on one side of the street, and on the other side of the street there is a big complex of multi-use tenants, and it's basically empty at night. So you've got this street, not super long street, maybe a third of a mile long, but it's got uninhibited curb space on each side of the street, and it's a long strip, and there's nobody in either one of the buildings on either side of the street. And every single day, I counted them the other day, there were a dozen cars with people sleeping in them on this one street. And this is Orange County, and Orange County is known as a affluent county, but this is affecting everybody. And the interesting thing that I've seen, and what really piqued my attention some time ago, is I noticed one car was parked in the same spot, and they had the sun shields up on the side windows as well as the front, and the vehicle, which was some type of SUV, had the paper plate from the dealer on it. It was brand new. Somebody had a brand new car, but they didn't have a place to live, and they were sleeping in that car. I still see it. It's now got a license plate on it, so they have some address somewhere where they're able to, unless they picked up their plates at the DMV. But just amazing to see this happening. And the curious thing about this, kind of to carry that out, is as you go down the street and see, and Louis got a nose, boy, he knows when there's a human inside of a car. So if he knows, I know, because he wants to go over there, because he is the nosiest dog on the planet. I'm telling you, he just drives me nuts. He just has to investigate everything. And I know somebody's in the car because he wants to go over there and see who it is. And so just these cars, are most of them, the vast majority of them, I would say 90% of them are late model cars. They're 2020s, 2021. They're not, old beat up cars where somebody who's, an alcoholic or a Skid Row type person is living in it. These are new cars, nice cars, and there's people sleeping in it. And every once in a while, if somebody's parked on the sidewalk where I walk Louis down, I will see somebody in the front seat wrapped in a sleeping bag or a tight blanket with the seat fully reclined, trying to get some sleep. And it's just incredible to see these things, to say nothing of what we've seen on the streets of LA and other cities around the nation, where poverty is just rampant, and the cost of living is just unbelievably high, pushing people out into the streets. And this, I think the headline kind of says it all. If things are so great, then why are millions of Americans sleeping in their vehicles? And we need to address that question in November and get this group out of there who has brought about this economic devastation to our country. Now, Eurasia Daily says that due to Durov's arrest, that's the founder of Telegram, the UAE froze the contract for the purchase of fighter jets from France. And after being detained in Paris, Telegram founder Pavel Durov, the UAE, is considering the possibility of complete blockade of military technical cooperation with France. And this is reported by the portal Avia Pro with reference to the media. The United Arab Emirates is considering the possibility of a complete blockade of cooperation with France, economic cooperation with France, after being detained in Paris of Telegram founder. That's poorly worded. After the detaining in Paris of Telegram founder Pavel Durov, the portal's Telegram channel says. The media also reports that Durov's arrest. After it, the UAE had already frozen the implementation of the contract for the purchase of 80 fighters from France, the portal notes. As reported by the EA Daily, the Foreign Ministry of the United Arab Emirates called on France to provide Pavel Durov, detained in Paris, as a citizen of the UAE with access to all necessary consular services, the Emirati Foreign Ministry said in a statement published by the WAM agency. The Emirates are closely following the case of Emirati citizen Pavel Durov, founder of Telegram, the Telegram social network, who was detained by the French authorities at the Le Bourget airport after they conveyed a demand to the French government to urgently provide with all necessary consular services, the publication says. Now, this is leading up to what I wanted to talk to you about, and we'll mention here in a couple of moments, so stick around. Breitbart says, intentional failure. Mississippi reveals the state spends more than $100 million a year caring for migrants. A report from the Mississippi State Auditor finds that the state spends more than $100 million annually on caring for migrants, a cost that the state governor Tate Reeves calls an intentional failure on the part of the Biden-Harris administration. The report claims there are more than 22,000 illegal aliens in the Magnolia State, and the costs to care for them are rising every year, especially in costs for doling out free education to migrant children, according to Fox News. The report revealed that the taxpayers are funding $25 million to provide education to migrant kids, $77 million to health care for migrants, and at least $1.7 million to incarcerate illegals arrested and convicted of crimes. And Reeves, a Republican, blasted the Biden-Harris administration and the Democrat Party for a situation that is constantly growing worse, and said the states are being forced to step up and pay for the Biden-Harris administration's intentional failure to secure our border, and Mississippi is no exception. Their dangerous immigration policies are endangering Americans and putting enormous financial strain on states all across our country, and it's long past time to put a stop to it, Reeves railed. Now, the interesting thing about this, he goes on to talk about the fact that, the border czar was the vice president, Kamala Harris. And the interesting thing, as I said, about all this is that we have people in power now who are so hungry to stay in power that they will bring people into the country illegally themselves and allow them to come and violate our own Constitution and immigration laws so people will support them and keep them in office. And this is what I think Isaiah was writing about back in chapter 2 and 3, where he's talking about the children for princes, which obviously is not to be taken literally, but it speaks of unqualified people incapable of doing their jobs. And this is really, I think, what we're facing today. And, this whole egalitarian thinking that's going on in the world today is leading up to what's going to happen during the tribulation period. There is indeed going to be a one world government, and this whole, We have equality of outcome, terms like equity that are being thrown around on a daily basis. And, the problem with this, and all people have equal value before God. There's no question about that. But God also has standards by which people are to live. And, Paul was talking about to the church at Thessaloniki. If you got people who won't work, they shouldn't eat. And, that's God speaking through Paul via the Holy Spirit. That, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. And, the Bible does not say anywhere that there's any institution that has the responsibility to care for the poor outside of the church. And we as individuals are to remember the poor. But watching what's happening now, watching all this immigration, this illegal immigration that's going on, and how it's taxing different states. And, we've got, California kind of carries the flag in all this and has the most progressive, not really progressive, it's a disaster plan for migrants, giving them, $150,000 each so they can put it down on a house, where we have thousands and thousands and thousands of veterans who are living on the street. And what do they do for them? Not a thing. So does this sound balanced to you? Does this sound like the right approach? When people saved up money for years and years and years to send one family member over to come through Ellis Island legally and live in the land where dreams come true. And now we've just got this floodgate coming in. And, the whole, I don't care what anybody says, the intention is to give them the right to vote, thinking that they'll certainly vote for the ones who let them come to America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. And it's sad how we're experiencing these things in these last days. And again, it's all under the guise of, well, we should care about people. Well, you're right. We should care about people. We should care about the people that fought and died and or nearly died, I should say, or were wounded in battle to maintain the freedoms that this country has, and fighting around the world for people in other countries to enjoy freedom. And all these things we see going on today are all preparatory for what's going to happen, I believe, in the not too distant future, when one guy rises up and basically takes over the world. Now, here's a story that's going to set up the final thing I wanted to talk to you about. The Post-Millennial says a Canadian pastor was convicted of criminal harassment for opposing drag queen story hours. Calgary judge Karen Molly has proclaimed a Canadian pastor guilty of criminal harassment for protesting a drag queen story time for children that a city library was hosting early this year. Pastor Derek Reimer was also found guilty of breaching his bail conditions, which bar him from protesting any LGBTQ event. Supporters of one drag queen story hour actually threw Reimer to the ground when he opposed an event, and a video of the apparent assault gained global attention. A judge just found me guilty today of criminal harassment for expressing my opposition towards drag queen story hour to a library manager set on hosting the event, for posting a video of our interaction on Facebook and saying we'll be back to protest if the event continues, Reimer told LifeSite News. When not demonstrating at drag queen shows for kids, Reimer is the head of Mission 7, an evangelical ministry to the homeless. The charges relate to incidents that occurred in Calgary from March 25th to April 2nd, 2024. Reimer could receive up to 2 years in jail at a sentencing hearing, and he told LifeSite that he will be posting the sentencing dates soon. The news could have been even worse for Reimer. Judge Molly did not find him guilty on charges of causing a disturbance, and she dismissed 2 charges alleging that he caused a public disturbance with a loudspeaker outside of the drag queen story hours. Molly said these actions were not criminal. Andrew McKenzie, the lawyer who is representing Reimer, said an appeal of the conviction is possible, and Reimer was released on bail. He was also charged over the drag queen show where he was thrown to the ground. The pastor, not the people pushing him onto the floor, was charged with causing a disturbance and mischief in that altercation. And it was this episode that got Reimer banished from entering any LGBTQ event. For this charge, he was also banned from being within 300 meters of any LGBTQ event. Did you catch that? They threw him to the ground. So much like what we've seen with the protest and this Antifa group and what's been going on in Portland forever and ever, it seems like since the George Floyd incident, it's justified rage. So these people were so enraged by this guy that they committed a criminal act against him. They threatened possible bodily harm. They actually carried out an assault against this guy, and he's the one that gets arrested because in the mind of this judge, their rage was justified. Nothing about charging any of them. So I think this pretty much falls under the heading of good being called evil and evil being called good. We are at the end of the age. Now, sorry, I just remembered this story as another setup for our final one. The Federalist says under Tim Walz, Minnesota banned Christians from teaching in public schools. Walz is poised to make similar bigoted, totalitarian, and unconstitutional policies across the U.S. should he be elected vice president. Effective July 2025, teacher licensing rules passed last year in Minnesota under Democrat Governor Tim Walz will ban practicing Christians, Jews, and Muslims from teaching in public schools. Walz is now the presidential running mate of current U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. His resume includes a stint as a high school social studies teacher who sponsored a student queer sex club in 1999. Starting next July, Minnesota's agencies controlled by Walz appointees will require teacher license applications to affirm transgenderism and race, Marxism, transgenderism, and race and Marxism without a teaching license. Individuals cannot work in Minnesota public schools nor in private schools that require such licenses. And the latest version of the regulations requires teachers to affirm students' gender identity and sexual orientation in order to receive a Minnesota teaching license. This is where things are headed. And this man is the vice presidential candidate for the United States of America. And this feeds in, these last two stories feed in the arrest of the pastor and this Minnesota school district story or the state school story. And it comes from ABC News, and it says Telegram CEO Pavel Durov indicted for allegedly allowing criminal activity on social media. And the initial charges were failure to moderate. All of this is just other language for censorship. And Pavel Durov, the Russian-born billionaire CEO of the social media messaging app Telegram, was indicted in France for allegedly allowing criminal activity on the platform, prosecutors announced on Wednesday. Durov was placed under judicial supervision and is banned from leaving the country, according to the Paris prosecutor's office. He avoided jail by paying a €5 million bail, prosecutors said. He must report to a police station twice a week for check-ins. The indictment comes the same day the CEO was released from police custody after being arrested in connection with ongoing judicial investigation, prosecutors said. He was arrested. The 39-year-old Durov was arrested at Le Bourget airport outside Paris shortly after landing on his private jet, and President Macron confirmed the arrest 2 days later. Telegram has some 800 million active users and a large user base in Russia and Ukraine. Launched in 2013, Telegram was designed to address growing concerns about digital privacy and censorship. And unlike many messaging apps of the time, Telegram was built with a focus on security, offering end-to-end encryption and features that prioritized user privacy. And the rise of the app's popularity was meteoric, making Durov among the wealthiest people in the world. He's estimated to have a net worth of approximately $15.5 billion, according to Forbes. Now, here's the interesting thing, and here's what I wanted to draw your attention to. I know that you're watching because you believe we're in the last days. I know that most would agree with the assessment that we are in the last of the last days and that things are wrapping up rather quickly. And I think what we need to understand, especially about these last few articles, is that, of course, the devil is behind the things that we see going on. He's behind the abortion industry. He's behind a lot of these things that are happening where migrants are invading other countries because he wants to, bring in his system where there's just a single governmental system that oversees the whole of the world. But I think this Durov story is important for us because the end game is to shut us up. You've got a pastor who is facing 2 years in jail. We talked about stories multiple times of elderly women who were praying in abortion clinics or standing in front of the gate trying to stop a woman, not physically, but just impede their progress, which is against the law, to access the facility that will kill their child, which is of the devil without question, and being arrested for that, sentenced to some facing 10 years, as we talked about last week. I remember that 75-year-old lady back in Tennessee. She got 3 years, and she's in poor health, and her husband is distraught over this. But listen, here's why I think we need to pause and close out our program regarding this particular issue. If they came looking for you, would you deny the faith? Would you stand up for truth? Would you be like that pastor I mentioned earlier? I will speak the truth. I will speak the truth. And you know what? This is not just, some conspiracy theory. It's happening. Pastors are being arrested. People are being arrested. Free speech is out the window. Much of what the Bible teaches is considered hate speech by governments around the world. And they're going to come eventually and tell us we can't teach or we can't say this or quote from Romans 1 or these other things. So, there was a statement that floated around for a long time, that if they were arresting Christians, would they arrest you? And I kind of backed that up a little bit further in my thinking, and that is if they were arresting Christians, would anybody come looking for you? Would you be on the arrest list because of how we communicate truth and how we stand for what we believe? And, we are in uncharted waters here in the U.S. Of course, we've had our racial issues. We had the blight of slavery in our history and all these other things. But we're coming to a time where Christians are beginning to be persecuted. And they're going to, at some point in time, write laws that say we can't quote certain things out of the Bible because it hurts people's feelings or is offensive to another group or in their minds is an act of hatred. And by the way, in many circles today, words are equivalent to physical violence. And they've been deemed as acts of violence when something is said that makes somebody feel bad about what it is that they practice or believe. So I really want to challenge you. Make sure your walk is strong. Make sure that, if they started rounding people up, that you wouldn't be amongst the deniers. And I want you to think about the example we have in Scripture. Peter warming himself at a fire, surrounded by people who wanted to see Jesus executed. And the moment got to him, and he denied the Lord not once, but 3 times, and the last time with an oath, saying, I don't know the guy, and never knew him, don't know anything about him. And, so we can't say, well, I would never do that. Well, Peter did. And, Peter was the biggest mouth amongst the 12. He was the one that was quick to speak. Sometimes he said things he hadn't even thought of yet. And, we can't say these pressures don't matter and I won't bend or I won't fold. But, thank the Lord, Peter was restored. And thank the Lord that God chose Peter to preach the first gospel sermon upon which the church was built. The church began in the book of Acts, and the Lord selected the thrice denier to be the vocal mouthpiece, so to speak. But Peter was then preaching under the inspiration and direction because of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. So listen, let's be strong. Let's be bold. We don't surrender. Silence is not the way to deal with these last days. People's souls are at stake. And we're told in Proverbs 24, verse 11, to rescue those who are drawn towards death, hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. And the Proverbs goes on to say, if we say we did not know this, will not he who keeps your soul know this and render to each one according to their deeds? So this is important. And, there is an end to all this. We do know and hope that one of these days we're going to get up and it's that day where, we're going to meet the Lord in the air with the dead in Christ. But until then, we don't have real any specific indication of what it's going to be like, other than it will be right before the rapture of the church. It will be as it was in the days of Noah. The earth was filled with violence. The thoughts and intents of man's heart was only evil continually, and the whole earth was corrupt before God. We can check all three of those boxes right now. Now, there was at that time faithful people. There's only 8 of them on the planet at the time who actually got onto the ark. But we are living in such times, so be strong. Make sure your walk is solid. Don't hide your light under a bushel. Speak the truth, speak it in love, and don't let them bully us into silence, because that's where all this is going. Censorship, in a word. That's what's coming, and it's going to include the church. But we have to do what the apostles did when the council told them, don't teach in this man's name anymore. And they said to the council, you decide, should we obey God or man? We have to make that choice to choose this day whom we will serve. We will bow to the cultural pressures of our day, or we will stand, having done all to stand in these last days. So be encouraged. God is for you. He's with you. And Hebrews tells us, and since that's true, what can man do to you? The Lord will be with you wherever you go. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thanks for joining us. And please, if you would, take a moment and share this out there in social media land and get the word out. I think people need to know all the things that are going on that the Medianites, as Amir calls them, aren't telling us. So pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for Terry and I, if you would, if I could ask that once again, as we're headed toward a bit of a busy season, beginning in Franklin, Tennessee on September 14th and 15th, speaking at a conference all day on the 14th, and in church services at Calvary Chapel Franklin on Sunday, and then up to Longview, Washington. After that, the following weekend, I think it's the 21st and 22nd, and speaking at a men's conference on Saturday, and at the church, Calvary Longview, on Sunday, and then off to Ohio, as we mentioned at the top of the show, in Brookville on Saturday at a prophecy conference, and then Sunday at Calvary Chapel Faith Fellowship in Liberty Township. So would appreciate your prayers. And during that time, too, Terry's going to be in Virginia, as I mentioned last week, speaking to the ladies that work for Behold Israel on a little getaway for them. And so she's got a pretty hefty teaching schedule coming up, too. So we covered your prayers. Love you all. Thank you so much for watching. Keep us in your prayers, and we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless.